If you lose this game for the Denver Broncos, you've now lost 2 straight home games against teams that you need to beat. Your road to the playoffs, your playoff hopes, if you're the Denver Broncos, if you start 0-2, Sandy, they're
and you haven't
done.
played a road game.
They're done. It's over.
Yeah.
Whatever playoff hopes the Broncos had, as thin as they are, and you and I didn't think they'd make the playoffs.
No.
But you know what? I thought they'd win last week. And I figured when I was calculating wins this season, I think they'd win this weekend, too, against Washington. Right. But if they drop this game, their playoff chances go to basically
even
zero.
If they win
I don't care what the stats are. They go to essentially zero. This is a must-win game in Game 2.
Even if they win this game, it doesn't really help them. It's an NFC opponent. It does them no good in tiebreakers. But I agree with you. If you start the year with 2 home games and you go 0-2, isn't it going 0-2 starting with 2 on the road or 1 at home and 1 on the road? It's 0-2 with 2 home games. And the Broncos, over the years, have rarely experienced that. They did in the Vance Joseph era, and they started 2-0. And since 2002, when the NFL went to 32 teams, teams starting 2-0 made the playoffs 61% of the time. And I think that's kind of low, actually. But in the last 2 years, 11 of the 13 teams starting 2-0 made the playoffs, including, I believe, the last 2 Super Bowl champions that both started 2-0. The Rams and the Chiefs both started 2-0. So, conversely, if you start 0-2, you're pretty much dead in the water. You're in last place, no matter what happens with the other teams. And I happen to think the Chiefs and the Chargers on the road will both win this week. The Raiders probably won't in Buffalo. I'm just guessing Buffalo might be a little bit angry, and the Raiders win over the Broncos last week. It was just a continuation of a pattern that has existed in this decade, where the Raiders have managed to beat the Broncos 7 times in a row, and they haven't really managed to beat anybody else very often, if at all. There was a quote today that I came across, and I think the quote relates to an individual, but it could describe the Broncos as a team. Tell me if you agree with this. Now, you can probably guess the individual.
Okay.
Although I won't name him. I'll give you a guess on who it is. It is pretty easy to say this player is no longer an arrow-up player. It's debatable to say that this player is even an arrow-across player. I think, and you can probably guess the individual.
I presume that's Russell Wilson.
Yes. Say the same thing about the Broncos, right? It is pretty easy to say that the Broncos are no longer an arrow-up team. In spite of all local and national predictions this year, last year, the year before, the year before that, the year before that, the year before that, the year before that, and to some extent the year before that. This is 8 years now. We've been told that the Broncos are an arrow-up team. Maybe not a Super Bowl contender, but an arrow-up team. Better than most. They are not. And anybody who believes otherwise is deluding himself or herself. It is debatable to say that the Broncos are an arrow-across team, which would mean 8-9, 9-8.
Right. Which is where
we had them at
8-9.
I think the Broncos, and my idea at the start of the year was 8-9, but now that they've lost to the Raiders, which I thought was one of the 6 games you can kind of check off as a win, even 2 wins against the Raiders I had built into saying they'll go 8-9. Well, they obviously won't beat the Raiders twice. I think they're a 7-10 team, if not a worse team than that. They're not even an arrow-across team, Sean. And so whether you're talking about Wilson in particular or the Broncos in general, there is no doubt that they are not an arrow-up team. Washington, to me, at least on defense, is an arrow-up team. I think they're probably on offense an arrow-down team, but they have some individual talent on offense. And the interesting thing is this week, when you talk to Sam Howell and ask him who he modeled his game after, he doesn't hesitate. Oh, Russell Wilson. I grew up watching Russell Wilson. I'm built like him. I like to think I play like him. And the question is whether he thinks he's played like the Russell Wilson who plays now, and that's a pretty low bar, or he's talking about thinking that he plays like Russell Wilson in his prime played, and that, of course, is absurd. Sam Howell will never be anywhere near as good as Russell Wilson was in Russell Wilson's prime.
Although
you would think Sam Howell would be more or less the equal now of Russell Wilson.
Howell has had a passing touchdown and a rushing touchdown in each of his first two games. He could do that again. If he does that again, he'll tie Tim Tebow's the only person who's ever done it.
Yeah,
3 games in a row. So he's doing a little bit of that.
Was last year.
Yes, exactly. The idea that the Broncos, though, are an arrow-up team, you make some good points, Sandy. The NFL sent out, as they usually do this time of year, a summary of the opening, the rosters for kickoff, right? The idea of saying what colleges had the most players, surprise, Alabama, things like that. But one of the things stuck out to me, and it's players age 30 or over, of which Frank Clark is one of those.
Yeah.
The teams that lead that list in the AFC are the teams that have had the longest streak without playoffs. The Jets have 15. The Broncos have 11. That's tied with the Ravens. No other team has more than 10. You want to know a team that looks like they're an arrow up? That would be a team like the Bengals, who have one player 30 and over on their roster and are already good.
Yeah.
Those are what teams that have the arrow up going. The Broncos are an older than average NFL roster. A lot of their talent is on the wrong side of 30. It has an odd combination of being an older than average squad with a lower than average experience level per player. That's hard to do. So you have a lot of people who are essentially journeymen that are bouncing around, don't play a lot, that are now sticking with the Broncos. They find themselves in a position where they absolutely have to find a way to pull it together and win this game. Now, they should. They should. I think they're a better team. I am 100% confident that Jerry Jeudy will play. The Broncos will bring him back. Right.
Out today as a participant practice.
So he'll come back.
He's going to play.
They won't have Greg Dulcich. They won't have Frank Clark. The
and I don't know if they'll really
get a
have
few more
Jerry
snaps
Jeudy
from
at
McLaughlin.
100%, but yeah.
But he'll be out there. There is, if you're the Broncos at home with virtually everything to lose, I understand that Sean Payton got brought in to fix this, and I understand that it's going to be a longer-term fix. In fact, you and I have been telling everyone that. It's a longer-term fix than you all think, a much longer-term fix. And it can't all even be done by coaching. A lot of it has to be rosters. That has to be turned over year after year. But Sean Payton finds himself in his first must-win game in his second game. Because not only is it the idea the Broncos' playoff chances would evaporate, Sandy. That in and of itself, that's bad. Also not entirely unanticipated. We didn't think they'd make the playoffs. But for Broncos fans who last year thought a turnaround was coming and it didn't, who this year thought a turnaround might be coming, and then to find out after 2 games.
Necessarily believe that, though. And I mean, we're generalizing about a fan base. I think the fans have smartened up.
Well, I'll say this. People who spend a lot of money on season tickets are going to be pretty ticked off that 2 games in, your team is playing out the playoff spring. That's it.
That may be, but no rational Bronco fan I've talked to. And that's actually most of them. I've been here for 45 years. I know a lot of Bronco fans, and I tend to associate with those who are rational. And I'm not saying negative. They root for the Broncos. They root very hard, but they're rational. No one thought they'd make the playoffs. And I mean, I don't know, 2 dozen, 3 dozen. No one thought they'd make the playoffs this year. They were right with us.
Which is interesting because the national
No one
media
thought.
actually had the Broncos
Well,
as
the
a team
national
that might.
media is behind the fans. The fans watch the Broncos. The national media doesn't really and hasn't for years paid any attention to the Broncos. They see a Bronco coach coming in, whether it's Vance Joseph, Vic Fangio, Nathaniel Hackett, Sean Payton, doesn't matter. They all forecast great things, and they do it locally too. The fans are ahead of the media. I keep saying that. The fans are way, way, way ahead of the media in terms of being realistic.
Why does that happen?
Broncos
How
are.
is the media missing on this? How are they missing so badly?
Because
Is it
the
cult of
media
personality
believes
stuff?
if you don't write or say nice things, you won't have access. You don't have access anyway. You don't have access anyway. So why do you operate in fear of retaliation by the team? What's the team going to do to you that they aren't already doing to you?
That
Denying you
that part of the
access.
equation is interesting.
Fans don't care. Fans have a choice whether to go to the games or not.